Alright, my name is Sean Fallon, and you're listening to episode 38, Frasier. Welcome to From First to Last. Hello again and welcome again. My name is Sean Fallon. This is From First to Last. Today I'm joined by a fellow podcaster. He is from the Cinema Joes podcast. His name is Alex Marcus. Hello Alex, how are you today, mate?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm good. I've got a little bit of a frog in my throat still. I've still got a little bit of a cold, but it's not too bad. I have done literally nothing to take care of myself. I've just kept pretending it's not there and just seeing what would happen. Now, Alex, what show did you choose for us today?
Well, I chose Frasier.
Finally, someone picks one of the, in my opinion, and we'll get into this probably in deeper meaning later, but like one of the best to ever do it. Frasier ran for I think 11 years, from 1993 to 2004, and there were 264 episodes, which I think makes it actually now it's the longest running show that we've done on this podcast, which was a record previously held, I think, by Bones, which was quite weird.
Wow.
But yeah, now Frasier is it. So, Alex, what's your experience with Frasier?
Well, so I never really watched the show when it actually aired on its first run, because I was born in 1990, so I kind of came of age with it in the background as a show for old people.
Okay.
But what I did do is, growing up, I saw a lot of sitcoms in syndication. And I don't know if they have this where you are, but in the U.S., a lot of the times afternoons, like all of the basic channels will just throw on old episodes of old shows. And so I educated myself a lot on television through that and through all of those episodes. And Frasier was a show that back then, like maybe when I was like 10, 11 years old, was always kind of like the third show that I would check out. So I would first try to watch Simpsons, and if it was a Simpsons episode that I had seen before, I'd change the channel and go to Friends. And then if it was a Friends episode that I'd seen before, I'd change the channel and I'd end up on Frasier sometimes.
Okay.
So I had like a kind of a loose understanding of it for a while, but I never really thought much of it. I think a lot of the show just went over my head when I was young.
Yeah, definitely.
But then when I was about when the summer after I graduated from high school, I was working a job at a restaurant, and I had like a 1 p.m. shift. And so I would always wake up in the morning, and Frasier would be on the TV. They had like an hour-long block of Frasier at 10 o'clock in the morning on a cable channel, Lifetime.
Okay, yeah.
And so I would just watch. I started watching it then because there's not much to watch in like the middle of the week at that time in the morning. So I'd watch that as I was getting up and getting ready for work and everything. And pretty soon, because they blow through episodes so fast, I had seen the entire series in only a few, like maybe about two months. I had seen the whole thing, and I was obsessed with it then. And I slowly told all of my friends about it, and then it came on Netflix, and I was like, everybody has to watch this show. It's so great. And so, yeah, that's kind of my experience. So I've probably seen every episode like at least twice now.
Oh, no, definitely. I mean, it's I know like my mum and dad were huge fans of it as well. And my mum will constantly say to me, like, when my dad's doing like night shifts and he's not at home, I'll send her a message, and she's in England, and I'm like, oh, what are you up to? And she's like, oh, I'm just here having a glass of wine, turn on the TV, and it's a 3-hour block of Frasier. So I was going to watch 2 of them. I've watched all of them. And, the show, it's such a weird show, considering that, like, obviously it's like the spin-off from Cheers, which was very much like, all in one setting, sort of like, it was supposed to be that sort of like, blue-collar humor. It was all about beer, it was all about stuff like that. And then to spin it off into Frasier, a show that is, like, really doesn't kind of dumb it down too much. Like, they will make some jokes that, if you get the joke, you feel really clever, which is quite weird for a show that hooks you in so easily. Like, it's so bingeable, but sometimes it can be like quite heavy in its references and stuff like that. But yeah, no, it's fantastic, and I wasn't that big a fan of Cheers. I think because I think Cheers sort of was the same thing as Frasier for you. Like, it was sort of when it was at its peak, I was, God, I don't know how old I would have been. I would have been like a toddler, So Frasier was more like, when Frasier came out, I was like 9 or 10 years old. And I think they used to show it in England, and it would be like the same thing, like on a Thursday night or a Friday night. It'd be like a block of TV that would be like Friends, Frasier, Seinfeld, and Roseanne, something like that. So you just watched them all. And I always just loved Frasier. I think more so than so many other shows, it was so rewarding, because like when you watched an episode, everything added up together. Like every misunderstanding, you could see them coming from a mile off, but that made it quite satisfying. Like, you knew as soon as someone said, "Oh, I heard a rumor that something, something, something," you're like, oh, that is going to just pay off hugely, and everyone's going to make a dick of themselves, and it's going to be really, really satisfying.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that the show does better than almost anything. I mean, I think like a show like Curb Your Enthusiasm probably does it really well as well, where it's just, that everything, they're setting up all of these things throughout the whole episode, and you think that it's just like these stray random moments or things like that, and then they always nail the payoff. And that's definitely one of the best parts of the show.
Oh yeah, and it's fantastic.
It's funny because you were talking about Cheers. I've actually seen a total of maybe 3 episodes of Cheers in my whole life. That's a show that has just completely missed me. And it's funny to think that, like, obviously Frasier is a spin-off of Cheers, and he was a character on that show almost the whole, like, for like a decade, and I have no experience with him on that show at all. It's just 100% Frasier. And so every once in a while a Cheers character will come on, and like the audience, like, because they record in front of a live studio audience, like the audience gets like super excited about it and everything, and it never does anything for me at all, because I'm like, I don't even know who these people are or why I'm supposed to be excited about it.
Yeah, that is such a weird thing, because like the same, I would probably have watched, God, I imagine there's probably 100, 200 episodes of Cheers, and I probably couldn't tell you the full plot line of a single episode, but I've seen episodes here and there. And not to say that I don't like Cheers, like I've always enjoyed what I've watched, but I think Frasier just got me in the sweet spot where that Cheers didn't ever do that. Right. But yeah, no, it's such a mad. I mean, it's weird that when I was watching this, the equivalent show I could think of now was actually Better Call Saul. Like, it was that sort of thing of like a hugely successful show that had a spin-off, and the spin-off was also equally as good, but in a different way. Like, so with Cheers, like Cheers was obviously a massive like sitcom juggernaut, and then it was like, oh, we'll spin that off into something else. And I don't think anyone could have possibly, because on paper, you can't imagine how Frasier can run for 11 years and be pretty much the top sitcom in America for a while. Like, Frasier and Niles both won, I think they both won 4 Emmys each, Yeah. It was, and they were nominated pretty much every year. Yeah, they were just clean up.
And especially if you consider the time that show was on, like it was up against Seinfeld and Friends and like all of these like classic shows, and Frasier just dominated the Emmys every single year.
It's mad. It's absolutely insane. Like, it's I love it because I am obviously a huge fan of this show. But like, I remember even when I was watching it in real time, like as a teenager, I was always just sort of like, how is this show so popular? When, because obviously our being English, our perception of like what we get from America is very much like, because I think I might have been when's this, 2004? Yeah, so I guess I'm watching this show and George W. Bush is in the White House, and all we're getting pumped over to us from America is this idea that America is a bit stupid and a bit sort of just a bit sort of like everyone wants to be the common man and all that kind of thing. And lowest common denominator is always going to be like the most popular stuff. And that's why, I mean, you have a lot of stuff like more recently that's been really popular, like 2.5 Men and stuff like that. That's just like very easy jokes and stuff like that. And then Frasier's there making jokes about like Hamlet and the
Vivaldi.
opera and Vivaldi. And it's like, absolutely nailing it and being like super popular. And it's I didn't understand it then, and I don't think I understand it now. But it was just
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think because I kind of caught up with it after the fact, I kind of have a similar experience with you, where it's hard for me to understand how this show, which seems so niche and highbrow in a lot of ways, like how it was one of the most popular shows in the country at the time, because that just doesn't track with my experience living in the country either.
Well, I mean, because it's that sort of thing. Like when you look at something like Friends, you can see why Friends is popular. You know, it's a joke delivery system. They're young, good-looking people. They live lives that people, you know, you might not necessarily have exactly the same thing, but you can kind of be like, oh yeah, I've got a friend like that, or I'm the Chandler of my friends, and so on. But like Frasier, just like
eventually became a really basically a rom-com.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a very accessible mainstream genre.
Yeah. Whereas like Frasier.
Frasier, there's romances obviously in Frasier, and I'm sure we'll get to it. But it's really like it's like a family show about these two brothers and their father.
No, I mean, I guess that's the thing, that is what you can hook into, like, and I think as well that I think that's the importance of like the Martin character. Like, you have to have that one character who is essentially us watching the show, watching the Cranes. You know what I mean? You are like. Because you have that, I think they do very well to sort of play with your, not so much your allegiances, but like, because a lot of the times you're watching it and you want Frasier and Niles to succeed, but some episodes you don't. Some episodes you are like, oh, you pompous dickheads, I really hope you get your comeuppance, like. So I think we are very much like we're in Martin's chair watching along with him, which I think ties the whole thing together and then makes all that highbrow stuff more accessible, because you've got a character who's speaking for you in the show, who's going to roll his eyes or just crack open a beer or just make a comment, like, so it's brilliant.
Right. Yeah, and it lets Frasier and Niles be the butt of the joke some of the time. Yeah. And I think that probably helps that dynamic. Yeah, no, very much so. Like,
it is. There is that wonderful thing of, and I mean, I think this speaks a lot to sort of like, I guess, like Kelsey Grammer and David Hyde Pierce, like, to do this show for as long as they did it, and obviously they've probably, I mean, especially Kelsey Grammer must have got quite a lot of like creative control towards the end. Like, I'm sure he was in a producer's role and all that, but there was never a point where his character started winning loads or anything like that. Always, right up until this finale, he's still a character, like a figure of fun. He's still a character who you are like, look at the, you're just like, look at this guy, and he maintains that all the way to the end. Like, his ego never got in front of him, and it was always like, no, this character needs to always be just a little bit behind the joke than everyone else. Like, you need to have like a likable character who you can laugh at, and I think that it's perfect sort of alchemy, like the way this show comes together. And you have, because if you knew Frasier in real life, I don't think you'd like him very much.
No, he would be insufferable.
Yeah, but having those little 30-minute bursts of him, you're like, oh yeah, Frasier's all right. As long as every couple of episodes something brings him back down to earth, then it's fine. That's what I need. I just need that medicine every so often, and that's what makes him so watchable. And it's brilliant.
Something that I think that the show doesn't get enough credit for is that, for all intents and purposes, Niles and Frasier should be basically the same comedic character. And the fact that they're able to find these shadings where they feel so distinct and different, and they're able to use them in such different ways, I think that you have to give the writers a lot of credit. And also, obviously, the performers who make them feel very different as characters, even though they're relying on a lot of the same type of comedic punchlines and, physical humor to kind of deflate their egos. And, all of those same sort of beats are so similar, but they still feel so distinct.
Yeah, and I mean, they feel like brothers. Because when sometimes you watch a TV show or a movie and they've just gotten like two comedians and they're just like, oh, these characters are brothers, and you're like, they're not brothers. Like, I just saw a trailer for a movie and it's Ed Helms and Owen Wilson are brothers. You're like, how are they ever brothers? They don't.
That's
it's
insane.
It's absurd. Whereas obviously Kelsey Grammer and David Hyde Pierce sort of look like each other. And
isn't that remarkable? Like,
it's
that
incredible.
They could find someone of that amazing, like, the acting caliber of David Hyde Pierce, like the fact that he's like an all-time level performer, and he looks identical to Kelsey Grammer. Like, it's insane that they were able to find that.
Well, apparently that was, it was something. I remember watching a documentary. Like, I think it was just before Frasier ended. They did like one of those big, like, hour-long documentaries about the making of the show. And I think there was a whole thing, because when the show was first sort of being pitched, it was basically because Kelsey Grammer had sort of had taken over Cheers, like the character of Frasier had sort of taken over the lead role almost. So they were like, right, we've got this guy, we've got him on contract, let's spin him off into something else. So they wanted to, and not spin him off, so let's give him another show. So they were going to do a show in a radio station, they were going to do all these different things, and then eventually they decided, we'll do Frasier. And apparently it was, the story goes that they had headshots for something else, and someone pointed to a picture and said, oh god, that guy looks loads like Kelsey, like a young Kelsey. And then that started the idea of like, well, what if we bring this character in as his, like, you know, his brother, and so on and so on. And that was sort of like, it was actually the other way around. It was like, we don't need a character who looks like Frasier. We've got an actor who looks like Frasier. What's his character going to be? And they just went from there. And it worked so well because, like you say, I mean, I have this say with my own brother. Like, we are quite similar, and we have a similar sense of humours, and we look similar to each other, but we're obviously different people. And I think that's the thing with Frasier and Niles. They are 90% the same character, but that 10% is where all the magic happens. Like that's where you get, like, Niles brushing the chair down with the tissue and stuff like that, and that's his little affectation and everything. And yeah, no, it's incredible. It's incredible writing and incredible acting, that you're not just watching Frasier and Frasier 2, you know, interacting with each other. No, it's brilliant. So, what did you think of this first episode, watching it now for this podcast?
Well, so the first thing that I was struck by is just how much of the show it is, you know? And, like, obviously, they're coming off of Cheers. This was a highly publicized, I'm assuming, show when it was debuting, so they put in a lot of time and effort to make it what they wanted it to be. But especially with the sitcom, you usually, like, tend to find a sitcom over time. You know, usually at least the first, like, 6 or 8 episodes is just, we have the talent in place, and now we have to figure out what the show is. And you could, if you watch the pilot of most sitcoms, they seem at least, and I mean, obviously you do this all the time, they seem like a little bit different from what the show ends up being. And this is the show, 100%. Like, it's remarkable how fully formed the show came.
Oh, definitely. This could be episode 10. This could be the first episode of the second season. You know, this is... and you make a very good point there, which I've said to a few people. Like, if you watch the first episode of any sitcom, it's not indicative of what comes next, or it tends not to be. Like, if you watch the first episode of Friends, like we were saying before, like, it's hard work. It's a lot of, like, okay, we've got these 6 people, we just need to... Because I think in that episode, they don't really leave the coffee shop, and it's just them telling stories back and forth. Like, it's very much just a showcase of that these people can tell jokes. Or, like, if you watch the first episode of Parks and Recreation, it's not good. You know, for a show that would eventually...
Parks and Recreation.
Well, yeah, exactly, yeah. Like, and it's very much that. It's like, okay, we've got these talented people, we can put them together, but we need to work out who has chemistry with who, what dynamics work, what pairings work, and stuff like that. But yeah, straight in from this, straight out the gate. They did that little quick recap at the start of just, like, Frasier saying, oh yeah, you know, I was living in Boston, divorced my wife, so on, so on, so on. So that's wrapped that up. And then just, like, yeah, just the characters were all there, the settings were all there, the pairings all worked. And it was just, the thing I kept writing in all my notes for this episode and the last episode is just how solid the jokes are. Like, because a lot of, you know, this is a sitcom from 1993. You know, you expect it to be quite rickety. Like, some of the jokes are going to be a bit weird, but no, I laughed my ass off all the way through this because I was like, God, these are just solid jokes, and it was great. It was so, just like you say, very confident. Knew exactly what it was straight away and just went for it, and I loved it.
Yeah, that's, I think, the same thing as well. I think that the only point that I would say that maybe the show isn't quite itself yet is in the Roz character, And
Yes.
I know a little bit of a background with that character. They had a tough time casting her. I'm pretty sure Lisa Kudrow was supposed to be in that role.
Okay,
and
yeah.
I think she even they even started shooting the pilot with her, and then they recast her.
Wow.
Yeah, and she's talked about how it was so devastating because to go through like the whole process of being cast in a network pilot is so arduous. You have to go through audition after audition, and then they bring you in and with the other people, and it's like a whole thing. And then finally you get cast and you're on the show, and obviously it's a very high profile show. And they actually got to the point where they were filming it, and then they were like, "This isn't working. We need to change." And Lisa Kudrow said like, "Oh my gosh, I was devastated." But then a year later she gets cast in Friends, so it's like it was a show. Well. Like you never know what the future's going to hold for you. But you never heard that story before?
I think I knew that. I think I'd read that they had. I think I'd read that she'd auditioned for it. I didn't realize. I think I'd read that either she was auditioned for it or that she was like right up until the last people. But I didn't realize that they'd actually started filming. That's Well, it'd be heartbreaking if she didn't then go on to make Friends and become a
right.
multi-millionaire. Well,
it's a funny story now. I'm sure it didn't feel funny back then.
Yeah, I always think about stories like that. Just to go off Frasier for thing, like Lord of the Rings, where they'd like cast Stuart Townsend as Aragorn and then fired him after like 2 weeks because he looked too young, and then brought in Viggo Mortensen. And obviously those films were so big, and those posters were everywhere. And if you were Stuart Townsend, you'd just be like, "Oh man, come on, dude!" He'd just be everywhere and like. But yeah, so for Lisa Kudrow, though, that's a good story. 'Cause it's sort of like she probably had a bit of a shonky year afterwards, while she was like a bit gutted, and then got cast on Friends and became the biggest thing ever. So
and it's a funny what if, because imagine it's hard to imagine anybody else in that Phoebe role other than Lisa Kudrow. So imagine what that would have been like if they had a different actor in it.
Yeah, and I think because I've only really seen Lisa Kudrow being Phoebe really. And I can't really imagine, because the Roz role is very much, in this episode, she's always a bit of an antagonist in this episode. She's kind of, you feel like they're going to have, well, I don't know what they were setting up. Maybe they were going to set up a bit of a will they, won't they between Frasier and Roz, because they were a bit contentious with each other at the start, or what. But, I couldn't really imagine like Lisa Kudrow in that role. It
seemed to me that they were trying to position her in a similar way that they've positioned Martin, which is like she's like the grounded, down to earth, like audience surrogate, but also she's like a radio pro. She knows what's going on, and she's going to be like the work foil for Frasier. I never even thought about the will they, won't they thing, but I could definitely see that in that first episode, and them maybe setting that up as well.
That's it. Because I guess when you watch this episode now, that's a ridiculous idea. Like their relationship becomes something much better and much stronger and all that. But yeah, just watching it in a vacuum, you're like, oh, okay, was that what they were going for here? Which I'm glad they didn't go with. If they didn't pursue that.
Yeah, at least almost. They did sleep together that one time.
Yeah, that's it. But that was
weird.
Yeah, it was a great sort of showcase, because even like having the thing of the chapter titles, where it's just sort of like, right, the job, the dad, Eddie, just the care worker, and it was sort of like, right, this is what we're doing, this is the show, and it's sort of like a bit of a bare bones plot. It was just, the plot was he just wanted Martin to be grateful to him or whatever. But they managed to do, in a 24-minute episode, they managed to do quite a lot, because they introduce a ton of characters. And obviously, you've got to be able to, because he's not meeting all new people. Like, I think the only character who's, brand new, who they're all meeting for the first time, is Daphne. Everyone else, you have to, they have a bit of a built-in relationship.
And she comes in so late.
That's it. That's right near the end.
And then I also thought it was funny that, fast forwarding to the end of the pilot, they never even confirmed that she got the job. They just use it as the tag scene at the end. Like, oh, she's there now, so I guess that she got the job.
Yeah, she's just there on the couch drinking a beer. So yeah, let's do it.
Which is especially funny because it seemed like the resolution to that argument that he has with Martin is that Martin's going to try to be more respectful of Frasier. And that would mean that he wasn't going to hire the woman that he didn't like.
Yeah, it's just maybe after they'd finished writing the episode, they were like, oh yeah, it doesn't matter. It'll be fine. The next episode we'll just have her moved in. It'll be fine. It's a great setup for the future. Like when I finished watching this episode, I was like, oh yeah, I could watch 20 more of these. I could just keep watching this all the way to the end, but obviously I'm not allowed to for the sake of the podcast. Like, but it's just such a strong, like, because I will say a lot of like sitcom pilots are pretty strong. Like they do, because obviously they get made, they're the good ones that get made into TV shows. But like a lot of them tend to be, as we said before, they're sort of strong in a vacuum, but in terms of the whole show, no, they're not the best episode. They're usually pretty weak. But this one, I think it was great because you had a good showcase of everything. You got like a bit of verbal stuff. You got the radio show. You got a bit of like Kelsey Grammer physical comedy when he sort of like is walking around the apartment and like pointing at things, and he's all very flouncy and very effete and particular. And then you get Martin coming in and just shutting that all down and just kill a line one after another. And then a bit of Daphne being kooky and weird. Like the one thing that the one element of the show that this episode didn't have was Niles and Daphne. Like I think that must be the next episode or whatever. And also as well, they did have that sort of like thing that Frasier did really well and they do this very well in the finale as well. They can have those big, stirring, emotional moments. And then just as they get a little bit too sappy or they're about to turn into melodrama, a really good joke. And then it brings it all back down to earth. And you're like, oh, brilliant. Like they do that very well with like the phone call. Like when Martin phones the station and he sort of like, bares his soul and all that. But they do very well to sort of put some jokes in there. And it's a nice emotional beat, but at the same time you end it laughing. You're like, yeah, cool. I'm not, I don't watch Frasier to sort of be miserable. I watch it to be happy. So we get those nice bits of catharsis, but then a big joke as well, which is great, which is very hard to do. And they do it very well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But what I will say is that what struck me really the most when I first watched this pilot episode, this time around anyway, is how like raw and real a lot of the emotion behind like that main conflict is between Martin and Frasier. Like I think that when I first started watching the show, I just it was on in syndication, so you just kind of jump in and then you're like in the middle of like season 6 or whatever, and then you end up cycling around and watching everything eventually. And so I was kind of used to like what the show kind of was in its later seasons, when they went for emotion, it tended to be a little bit more like sappy kind of family sitcom kind of emotion, and that's a little bit in the pilot, in the finale also. But in this first episode and in the first season too, it feels like real raw emotion, like that. Like Martin's not like a lovable, like grumpy old man. He's like kind of like a dick and ungrateful in a way that like you would imagine a parent who like valued their independence and doesn't want to have to like rely on their children would be in that situation. And I was really struck by that, the reality of that.
Yeah, that is good, because there's a lot of shows you can imagine it would just be like the father would just waltz into the house and take over the place, and it'd be a sort of thing of like, it would be more of a territorial battle, sort of like, whereas there is a sense of that in this, but it's more that sort of thing of like, they say Frasier's started a new life, he wants his independence. Martin's retiring, he wants his independence. These two men have never really seen eye to eye, and now they're forced into this situation. And it does get that it is quite raw, the sort of like, because the argument they have before Frasier storms out is fantastic. Like that sort of, when Frasier sort of like snaps and he, like, I think it's about Daphne. And they have that sort of back and forth, and Martin unleashes on him, and Frasier does as well. And you can see that interesting thing as well of like, both men are right. They both do have legitimate grievances, but they need to kind of like put aside their ego and talk about it. And I mean, see, that's great drama. You know, that's drama you'd see in a really good drama, like as opposed to like a 24-minute Friday night comedy.
Right, and that's what family is. You know, it's people being like people in their perspective being right about like how they feel and trying to find a way to make that work with the person on the other side of things who also feels right about how they feel. But you have to find a way to make it work because you're family. You have to stay together. You can't just end the friendship and walk away. You know this, and what I like about it is that it kind of subtly explains why maybe the audience who knows Frasier well has never heard of this family before. You know? Because it's like, it must have been strange that you've watched this character for 10 years on a TV show, then all of a sudden, oh, by the way, he has a father and a brother across the country that he never mentioned, you know?
Yeah.
But you could kind of believe that if he never really got along with his father and they were so different as people, that maybe they did have one of these real bad fights like earlier in their lives, and he just stormed off across the country and tried to just forget about them, you know? And now this is his attempt to kind of come back and try again and be the good son, quote unquote, that the title of the episode has. And I think that's the backbone of the whole show, is that kind of evolution over time. And that's a great backbone for a series. That would be a good backbone for like a family drama, you know?
It's interesting that they don't focus on, because it'd be very easy to focus on Frasier and Lilith's divorce, you know, and have like, oh, Frasier's in Seattle trying to find love, trying to find a new, you know, make a new family and all that. But it's not. It is that sort of real thing of like, you know, can you go home again? And then when you do, and you have to like bring these people back into your life, like, how easy is that?
Speaking of Lilith, I just wanted to say, I thought it was very funny that they made a couple of veiled references to her in like as punchlines to jokes in this, and the whole audience goes crazy. And if you've never seen Cheers and you've never seen the rest of Frasier, you would have absolutely no idea why any of those jokes were funny.
Yeah, it's like, all right, dude. You know, it's like, oh god, this crowd is really into divorce. They are mad for it. Like, yeah, no, it's well, to kind of talk on Cheers, it's amazing. Like, obviously, I think everyone except for Kirstie Alley came and did a guest spot on Cheers at some point or another. Came and did a guest spot on Frasier at some point or another. Kirstie Alley didn't do it because her Scientology views she can't promote psychiatry as a Scientologist.
Oh, okay.
So that's a bit whatever. But like, I mean, they did really well because they got like Woody Harrelson to come back and all that. And it was interesting though. I remember one of the episodes of Cheers that I watched. I must have caught it after Frasier had started. And someone asks Frasier about his family, and he says, "I'm an only child, and my father was a scientist who died." And I was watching that, I was like, no, liar! That's not true. And then they have, when Ted Danson, when Sam is on, he says to Frasier, "Oh, I thought, you know, your father had died," or whatever. And Frasier says, "Oh, we just had a big fight, and I didn't want to talk about him," or something like that. And they sort of managed to make it work in continuity. But it was very weird to watch it, because it's very weird to watch Cheers now, because you're like, no, why are all these other characters talking? Where's my Frasier? Where's Frasier going? Because Frasier's not in the first couple of seasons of Cheers as well. He doesn't come into it until after, I don't know how many years. He's not at the start.
Oh, and interesting. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, because he comes in. Oh god, if I can remember this. So it's like Sam and Diane, and then I think Diane leaves, and when she comes back, she's with Frasier, and then she leaves Frasier at the altar. You know, I think. But Frasier ends up because Frasier basically plays the same role, obviously the same role, but he is like it's an interesting reversal, because rather than having like Martin surrounded by these like, you know, pompous snobs, it's Frasier surrounded by Martins. Like, I guess that's the plot of Cheers, like. And that's it. And somehow, yeah, like I say, Frasier was the breakout character. But I mean, I say somehow, I think it's because Kelsey Grammer is amazing. Like, he can sell a joke so well. He is such
a pro.
Oh yeah, he's just got like that voice. Is like his physical comedy. He's not afraid to make an idiot of himself. Yeah, no,
just the way he manages to get laughs out of walking across a room is just like,
yeah. Oh, I was in stitches. Like that scene. I think when the doorbell rings and he like solemnly closes the piano. and like just slouches across. And I was like, oh my God, this is brilliant. Like, it's like a really good bit of like silent physical theatre. Like, if you were watching this as a play and it was all there, you're like, oh, I can see 100% what this is like. And I know, and it's amazing. I think that's everything. Oh, sorry, one thing, yeah, so one thing in the pilot, and this comes up again in the final episode, so we can jump to the final episode. There was a very interesting thing. So Daphne is apparently from Manchester in England.
Yeah, I was thinking about how you feel about Daphne as a character.
It's very tough because, like, this was very... Because there's only been a real turnaround on this in the past couple of years where people will, where you'll see, like, English people depicted in America, and they'll use, like, English slang, and they'll have accents which aren't, like, posh London accents or Cockney accents. And it's quite refreshing because I'll watch a TV show and I'll see someone, I'll be like, oh, shit, that person's from, near where I grew up or whatever. But Daphne, like, Jane Leeves, who plays Daphne, is from Essex, which is like south of England, and Manchester's north of England, and her accent is sort of a weird mix of both. And then later on, when her three brothers show up, they're played by a Scottish guy, an Australian guy, and a guy who was born in Swaziland in Africa, and all three of them are doing different accents, and all three of them are not doing a Manchester. At no point does anyone do an accent from Manchester at any point. And it got to the point where by the time all three brothers had shown up, I was like, right, so is this the joke? Is the joke on me at this point that, like, I'm trying to, like, find fault in it? Is it just like, oh, we'll just get these... Because when, like, Simon comes in and he's, like, a full London Cockney, that's like if... it would be like if they said, oh, my friend's from New York, and he came in and he was a Texan, and it was just like, oh, it doesn't matter, it's all American. That's the sort of like... So that used to... I did used to find that, like, I'd be watching the show and I hated those characters. Because I'm like, oh, fuck... Not Daphne, I love Daphne. But whenever Daphne's brothers showed up... I think her mum as well was the same. They just picked random English accents. We're like, oh, whatever, just shove it in, it's fine.
I think it was just, oh, does this sound funny? Okay, we'll use it.
Yeah, that was it. And I think, watching it now at a bit of a, like, watching this finale and when the three brothers showed up, I really enjoyed it. I was like, oh no, this is good. I like what they're doing here. I like that idea that... Oh, well, it's just quite interesting that you've got Frasier and then a bunch of English people, but they haven't brought over... all the posh, it's not like, oh, here's my brothers, and it's like Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, and
right.
It's like, oh, these are the worst kind of people to bring into Frasier's life. A bunch of like Mancunian, Cockney, whatever English uncouth nonsense, and just bring them in. And I appreciated it, and I love all those three actors, like Robbie Coltrane, Richard E. Grant, and Anthony LaPaglia, are all fantastic comedy actors. And yeah, I was like, no, I love this. I think
you weren't offended by the one that, like, you literally couldn't understand any words that he was saying? He was just speaking gibberish?
Yeah, well, because that actor's Scottish, and it's like he was speaking in Scottish at some points. Like, he just had a full Scottish accent. Like, oh, come on, man. You're not even trying now. But no, I still sort of appreciated it. I thought they had some good jokes. I did like when they're talking about the canon, and it's like, which foot's lost two toes, and he points at the other brother, and he's like, that one.
That was,
and I kind of like that joke. So this finale, I caught this. I didn't catch this in real time because I don't know if you've listened to other episodes of the show, you may have heard my sort of convoluted backstory. But I used to be a teacher overseas, so I left England when I was 21, and I was an English teacher in Thailand, and then I was an English teacher in South Korea, and then Istanbul, then a little bit in England, and then I moved to Australia. So there's a big sort of TV black hole for me when I first left home, because obviously I lived in Thailand. I didn't have access to terrestrial channels and all that, so I was just buying like DVD box sets and all that. So a few seasons of TV have just, like, I had to catch up with them later. So when I had finished my contract in Thailand and I was back in England, I was just like binging TV and trying to apply for jobs in Korea. And I ended up, my mom said to me like, oh, Frasier ended a couple of weeks ago. Why didn't you watch all of that? So I watched the final season, loved it. and then watched this final episode, and it was quite weird for me, because obviously it's all about goodbyes and moving away and leaving your family and all that, and I just done that, and I was about to do it again. So it sort of affected me quite. I was like, oh god, this is gorgeous, and very. I think they nailed that sort of weird feeling of like a big goodbye. Like I feel like they really nailed that, and obviously it was a big goodbye to the show and a big goodbye to these characters and all that, and I thought that was great. But that's skipping ahead. What did you think of this finale? Like, did you watch it in? Oh, you didn't watch it in real time. So what did you think of this finale when you first watched it? Like the first viewing.
I think when it would be hard for me to remember 100%, but I feel like I thought that it was pretty satisfying, because I prefer shows, like especially a show that you've spent a lot of time with, having like a nice resolution at the end in a finale. Sort of the kind of shows where it's just like, and then things keep going, but we don't watch it. It always feels a little bit not quite as satisfying as I would like. So I like that this came to like a very like nice definitive end point for the characters, even though obviously all of their lives are still going to continue on, you know. They were relatable real changes that they were all going through. It wasn't, you know, sometimes at the end of a show you kind of, everybody gets like the great promotion and the great wedding proposal, and like all of the things fall into place that you could ever want, so that way everybody gets a happy ending. And obviously this is a very happy ending, but I feel like it built to it in a pretty natural way. And I liked the little bit of ambiguity at the very end, where you find out that he's not on the plane to San Francisco. He's on the plane to Chicago, trying to find if this love connection is going to work out or not. And I like that a lot, because that's like, there's emotional setup to that moment, but there's been no plot setup at all. So you're left wondering like, well, wait, is he going to go there for like a week or two, and then he's going to go to his new job in San Francisco? Or like how, like where we've been spending all this time talking about San Francisco, and now he's in Chicago, you know? So I thought that was like a nice kind of interesting twist on the everybody gets a happy ending.
Yeah, that's very true. That's wonderful. And like, you're very right. Like Daphne and Niles having a baby, and Ronnie and Martin getting married aren't things that have just come out of nowhere. They have been full season-long plot lines that have resolved themselves at the end. Because there is that thing, like when you have like an ending where it's the space of like one day and everyone's dreams come true, and then the show ends. You're like, not into
well,
this.
Like how on Friends, like, you know, because that's on the mind, you know, all of a sudden Paul Rudd pops up with like 5 or 6 episodes to go, and like he gets married to Lisa Kudrow, and you're just like, wait, what? Like that's a little fast. Yeah, and then it's like, oh, and they had a surrogate, you know, Monica and Chandler had surrogates, and now they're also having a baby, and it's like, oh my goodness, everybody's so much stuff, great things are happening, except for poor Joey, who didn't get anything out of that, except for a failed spinoff. But but yeah, I thought like, and that I know a show that recently ended that I watched is Girls, HBO's Girls, and that had kind of a little bit of this too, where it was just like all of a sudden like people get married or people get these job offers out of nowhere. And I mean, I guess that is sort of the things that happened in this episode, but it feels more earned for some reason. You know, like Frasier gets a job offer out of the blue, but he's been doing this job for a decade, so it's like it seems like he's due for a job, like an upgrade in his professional career, you know?
Yeah, no, well, I mean, the thing is, like, he is a celebrity, like, he is like a Dr. Phil-esque character, you know, he is someone, so it would make sense. And also, obviously, his agent, Bebe, is the best character that's ever been on television. So, obviously, she would get him the job. When it's that whole thing of everyone's complaining about how hot it is, and it's like, oh, it's 90 degrees, it's hot as hell, and then Bebe just comes in, she's like, don't you love this weather? It's just like, oh my god, I just adore her. She's so ridiculous. But amazing.
But what's great about that moment is that it's not just a line. She like swaggers into that room as relaxed and breezy and carefree as you've ever seen her. So it's like a full body kind of delivery of this great punchline. And it just shows like how talented she is as an actress, even though it's a relatively small role. She only pops up like a handful of times, but it's like she's one of the best parts of the whole series.
Oh yeah, no, every time she's on screen, she just like steals the show, and again that wonderful thing with Frasier, just like the whole show, and again with Kelsey Grammer, like I can't speak highly enough of him. Like he always sort of, I feel like he always knows when to get out of the way and just let someone do a little showcase and do their own thing. Like he's not trying to, like when Bebe's talking, like every line of hers is dynamite. He's not trying to like one up her or speak over her or just like try and get in. It's just like, no, just this woman is killing it. Just let her do her thing. And that was always, I think, the thing in the show. They were always quite happy for him to, even though the character wants to upstage everyone else, Kelsey Grammer would always sort of be like, no, we'll let whoever this mad guest star is do their own thing. And I think that's good. But yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful thing. Like, and right up until the end, to talk about this last episode, like right up into the end, they still have that thing of like, yes, Niles and Frasier are gonna throw the wedding for Martin and Ronnie, and they give you that good like 15-20 minute plot line in the middle of the finale where Frasier's just doing all his usual, but he's back on his bullshit, and it's like dancers and cannons and Chinese acrobats and ice sculptures, and you're like, yeah, this is good. This character has learned nothing over the course of this show. Like they're not giving him like, oh, in this final episode he's going to calm down. It's like, no, he's going to be 110% manic, sweating, high-pitched voice, bug eyes, complete ridiculous farce. The dog's gonna eat the ring, the cannon's gonna make a truck tip, just that whole thing. Like, and it was good. It was like, oh, it was a lovely, because sometimes with finales, like the finale for, say, The Office, they just sort of like stop and they're like, let's just, and the characters just get a like half an hour to just be like, oh, we had a good run, didn't we? This was fun. And it's very much a sense of like, oh, the show's over, and these characters are going to leave, and these actors are going to leave, so they're just going to talk about how much fun they've had. Whereas Frasier was like, no, we've got one last episode. Let's do a big Frasier episode. And a big Frasier episode is Frasier trying to arrange something and it going out of control. Like when there's an episode where he's like running a restaurant, and the whole thing goes to shit really quickly.
All of my favorite stuff that Frasier does is that kind of like comedy of manners farce where it's they have to throw a show together, they have to throw a dinner party together, and then everything they set up the stakes amazingly, and then all of this you just watch as every single thing that could go wrong goes wrong. And it always is like Frasier and Niles running around with like their hairs on fire, trying to be like, everything's fine, as just like more and more things go wrong. And there's so many examples of that, and I did appreciate that they tried to kind of give us one last one of those. I was listening to an episode that you did on 30 Rock, and you mentioned that like a lot of the times it seems that, especially with comedy finales, that you kind of have like a greatest hits tour. I thought that is definitely the case with this like impulse. You have the wacky British people, you have the planning of the big party that goes wrong, like you have and then you get that nice touching moment at the end where it's like, oh, none of that really mattered because like we really care about each other, and it felt really earned at that point. But even in that, like even in that big where she's finally giving the announcement that he's leaving, they still have that whole kind of like comedy of misunderstanding, which is so well done. Like it's so excellent the way that every little stray beat is like, oh no, maybe he really is sick, maybe he's dying, oh no, that can't be what it is. And then like the capper is they hear the voicemail or the answering machine from the doctor. It's like, I'm so sorry about the news, like I'm gonna do everything we can for you.
Yeah,
and it's like, that's excellent. Because
and
like
they pile
other
that
shows,
on.
it would have just been like, oh, like he makes an announcement that he's leaving, and it's like, oh, it's like the emotional moment of the show, so the jokes are gonna calm down, and we're just gonna be like honest about like how sad this is that the show is ending. But instead, they even make that hilarious. Like that's one of the funniest things out of the like hour-long episode. One of the funniest things is like the reveal that he's leaving to go to San Francisco.
Yeah, and it's genius. Like that whole thing of like that starts so early as well. Like when he's talking to Bebe and she says, "Oh, you've got." He says to her, "Oh, I'm trying to give away some of my old stuff before I go, so I got you. So I wanted to give you this." And then that just feels like just a throwaway line. And then she says the thing about the eye guy. And then when her son comes in, and it's like, oh, is that just one last joke for that character? Cool. But then all of that comes into play.
Yeah,
so his eyes can't stop watching.
Amazing comedic sequence.
And that was something, like you say, I think you were spot on when I was spot on about it being a greatest hits thing. Because it's like, why was Frasier good? Because the characters, because they could hit those emotional beats, because they had solid jokes. But it was always a farce, and a farce of manners. And also, like, some of the best episodes would just be one person would overhear half a conversation, and then they would extrapolate what that meant, and then they would tell that to someone else, and then that person would tell someone else, and then they'd overhear something, until in the end everyone's just like the episode where Niles is having a costume party, and everyone's dressed as like literary figures.
Yes.
And I think Frasier's dressed as Geoffrey Chaucer, so he's all like bawdy, and he's like, "Come here, wench," and Niles is dressed like Cyrano de Bergerac or something like that. So he's got the big nose, and he's all in like the whatever. And I think it's just, again, it's one of those things. I think Frasier and Daphne have been away for the weekend or something, and then someone overhears something, and then everyone thinks that Daphne's pregnant, but everyone can't work out who the father is, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then I think in the end, like, Niles gets drunk, and I think pulls a sword on Frasier. And it's just like, and it's that thing of every single building block piece moves perfectly until this final confrontation when you're just like, it's such a satisfying bit of fireworks, and you're like, this was wonderful. And I think it's so clever how they build that. And just to have here, like in this final episode, it's like 2 scenes just to say, like, remember this? Yeah, we were really good at this. You know?
Yeah. And it's like, all it makes you do, because it's just enough to remind you how good they could be. But then it's like, all it makes you want to do is go back and watch the episodes where they were able to devote a whole episode to those sequences. Because when they have the time, because it did feel a little bit rushed, I'll say. It did feel a little bit rushed and thrown together. But when they have the time to do the whole episode about it, it's one of the best comedic things ever to be put on TV, I think.
It was a well that they went back to quite often, and they always sort of came back with good stuff, and it's great for this like you say, this finale to sort of give you a little taste of that. I mean, I will say I absolutely love I love Laura Linney, like the actress who plays
yes.
Oh god, I don't even know her name now. No, so that just I was writing in my notes Laura Linney, and she's amazing. And I thought that plot line of Charlotte, thank you. So that plot line of those two together was just, I think it was an amazing show that after 11 years, like when he meets Charlotte and the chemistry those two actors have and the characters and all that after like 11 years you were like, oh no, this is the one. This is the woman you should be with. And then obviously they're like, oh no, well she's got to move to Chicago, so they have that whole thing. And their goodbye scene where like her car arrives and she keeps leaving and coming back. I was like, I was just watching this last night and I was like getting a bit teary. I was like, oh, that is just such a gorgeous sequence, because it has, again, that thing of big emotional beats but a few little jokes, and then just ends on something. Just when she comes back in to give him the bit, like she jumps into his arms and says, we couldn't say goodbye, and a headbutt and all that. I was like, oh my god, that's absolutely gorgeous.
It was very sweet.
Yeah. I think they did very well.
He's been with a lot of women over the course of the show. Do you think that she really was, like, is that the one that you were happy that he is maybe ending up with?
I'm trying to think of, all of them now. Yes. Because I'm trying to think of, women who lasted more than a few episodes. Like, there was obviously the boss of the station who he had the weird little illicit affair with, and then they got, they were on air. Were they, like, Dirty Girl and Bad Boy or whatever?
I think it was on, like, the intercom system, so the whole station could hear them.
You know what I mean? So that character was incredible, but I don't think that could have sustained. But I don't think there were that many long-term...
I always liked him and Felicity Huffman's character. Because that had the same sort of vibe that the station manager had, but they just had better chemistry, I think, and I just always liked them together. I thought that he was at his best when it was someone who challenged him and who he couldn't be like the alpha in the relationship, I always liked that dynamic the most for him.
Is Felicity Huffman the one who's really nasty to the family, and then there's a scene where she starts to choke and no one helps her? Is that Felicity Huffman? I know I just remember there being a scene where she there's a love interest, and I think Frasier goes to get his jacket, and she's eating something, and she starts to choke, and like Martin and Daphne and Niles all exchange a look, and no one helps her.
I remember that moment. I don't remember which actress it was, but I definitely remember that. It could have been her, because she definitely wasn't the nicest. She was like the news person. She came on to do a news spot on his show every week.
Oh yeah, no, I can't think now. I just remember that, because what it is, so she's choking and then she coughs it up, and then I think Frasier helps her. And then when she leaves, he turns and looks at them and he just goes, "Shame on you." And I just remember, my mum used to do that to me all the time. Like, after that episode, I'd do something, she just turned to me like, "Shame." But I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think of, like, sort of long-running love affairs. But I think for the final season, like, with Laura Linney, they went for, like, the big unambiguous, like, these two characters look really good together. They're madly in love with each other. So maybe they've got a future together. Because like you say, there is that sort of ambiguity with the ending where if you're into the Frasier-Charlotte thing, as I was, I sort of like punched the air and I was like, yeah, go get her. But if you're not, you're like, well, maybe he's just going there for a week just to sort of like see her off and then he'll go to San Francisco. You know, whatever.
Yeah. Well, because just his track record with women is such that it's such a Frasier move to be like, oh, I'm going to go on a plane and like declare my love and get caught up in the romance of all of it. And then like 2 or 3 weeks later be like, oh, I actually can't stand this person anymore.
Yeah, that is very true. Like the next season of Frasier would be like, either it would start with him arriving back in Seattle and be like, yeah, no, it's a no-go, you know, or you'd have like half a season of him in Chicago just like eating deep dish pizza and not liking Laura Linney. But I don't know, it's a bit of a weird one, because I think as well I'm clouded by how much I love Laura Linney. I think that's what sort of gets my that's what kind of like shapes my view of it. But I do think it is a good ending. I don't think the show would have worked. I don't think the ending would have been as satisfying if he'd just gone to San Francisco. I think the idea that he's sort of broken the cycle a little bit, and he's not just going to go to San Francisco and work at a radio station and, you know, have a producer and, you know, whatever, and just do the same stuff. It's like, okay, we've broken the cycle a little bit, and he's going to go and, you know, do the sort of... He's going to follow his emotional side rather than his rational side, you know what I mean? Go and see what that brings. And I don't know, it's good. And I just noticed in my notes there was also a very good payoff for the first episode, because when he says goodbye to Martin says to him, thank you. Like, thank you for everything. Like, okay, well, that's good. It only took 11 years, but they got that round. That's good.
I have to tell you, I didn't get that emotional when he was saying goodbye to Charlotte, but I was shocked that I was full-blown crying when he said goodbye to the family.
Oh yeah.
Like, just when, like, after the scene when, like, they think he's dying, he's not dying, okay, and then they all say goodbye, and they're like, hey, we shouldn't say goodbye yet, he's gonna be here for another week, like, what, like, that scene... I started hysterical crying. I couldn't stop myself. It's like, and I don't even like, and I think it speaks to how great of actors they are and how strong those characters were, that even just jumping back in, I hadn't seen an episode of the show in a couple of years before doing this. Immediately you're just right back in the emotional reality of those characters, and you feel what they're feeling.
Oh, definitely. When Niall said, I'll miss the coffees, I was like, ugh.
Yeah, no, that's what did it for me too. I was like, oh gosh, I can't. I lost it. Yeah,
and it's great. I mean, I think it is... It's weird to have a show that was, like, obviously ran for 11 years, but they don't limp to the finish. It's not like you're like, oh my god, let's just take this out and shoot it. Like, I did feel like when I watched the finales of, say, Friends and How I Met Your Mother, there was very much a sense of, like, this show... we may have gotten a bigger, more satisfying ending if we'd ended a few years ago, but it's gotten to that point now where... Because actually, sorry, that was something that I found really fascinating. The finales of Seinfeld, Friends, and How I Met Your Mother, obviously very different in quality, but one thing that was the same throughout was by the time you got to those final episodes, every line of dialogue a character said, joke or not joke, got a laugh. It was just... essentially they just turned on the canned laughter and they just left it on. Like, you couldn't... It was confusing because, like, people were saying lines that were sort of, like, they had the cadence of a joke, but they weren't funny, but they were getting a big laugh. And I was like, I don't understand this. It's jarring. But watching this final episode, 264 episodes, still very, very solid jokes. Like, still, like, they were earning the jokes right up, like, earning their punchlines right up until the last minute, like, which was incredible. Like, because so many of those sort of, like, filmed in front of a live studio audience comedies that run for that long, they just, you run out of steam and you can't sustain it. But it was incredible to kind of, like, watch this episode, and they still had that great setup punchline. Just fantastic. Just I know it's like I shouldn't be praising a comedy for having jokes, but it still managed to sort of have that same, like, from the first episode to the last episode, that same solid. There was no laziness to it. There was still a lot of work put into it.
I think they do deserve compliments for being able to earnestly say that after 11 seasons and over almost 300 episodes. And then especially if you think about the fact that, like, these were the same people who wrote on Cheers, who wrote Frasier on Cheers for, like, almost a decade. So this is almost 20 years worth of this character that they're finding ways to make funny. And it wasn't just repeat jokes. It wasn't just callbacks and references. They're new stuff that are original in the context of the last episode were still, like, good jokes that made you laugh. And they didn't make you laugh because of this sense of nostalgia or familiarity with the characters. They were just good jokes. And I think they definitely deserve credit for that, because that's hard. I mean, I think that, you set up an idea with a sitcom, and it's like you want to mine as much comedy out of this situation as possible. But, I mean, if you think, really, you're doing 22, 24 episodes a season, I think some of these seasons were, like, 26 episodes long. After, like, 4 or 5 years of that, you've pretty much told all the jokes you can tell with those characters. So the fact that you go 11 seasons and you're still making good original jokes, they definitely deserve credit for that. And
it was great. There was some real solid. When they arrive at the vet, when Frasier, Ronnie, and Martin arrive at the vet, and Niles comes out and he's bottle feeding the monkey, I was a little bit ashamed of myself of how funny I found that, because you can see the joke coming from a mile off, but I was like, no, that is really good. I'm very, very happy with that.
And it shows how good they are, because I think a lot of lesser shows would make a similar joke, but it would just be the visual gag of the joke. But they managed to put like 4 or 5 tags on the joke from the time that they see the monkey to the time that they realize that the monkey's not the baby. Like where everybody gets a funny line in the moment, and it's like, that makes it. It's impressive. It's impressive what they earned all those Emmys.
Yeah. No, that's true, because it would have been very easy just to have, like, the door opens, Niles comes out, the audience laughs, the audience probably gives it an applause, and then they follow Niles in. It's like, oh no, this is the real baby, and so on. But yeah, like you say, I think each character got at least 1 or 2 little kind of follow-up jokes, and Ronnie got a few digs in and all that, and it was good. It's the sort of, like, it was relentless. Like, jokes-wise, they do keep, like, punchline. And it's good. It's satisfying, because there's not, like, if you try and watch a sort of, like, live studio audience comedy now, what's on TV? Is it just Big Bang Theory? Is that all that's left? You know what I mean? And that's not my particular cup of tea.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's like a bunch of. I think there's still like a decent amount on CBS over here. Like CBS cranks out the live action, like the camera, like the multicam sitcoms. But it's definitely. It's not great quality anymore. That's definitely not where the creative minds of this new generation are not gravitated towards the live studio audience format.
No, not at all. But yeah, no, this is... Oh, well, I mean, after Frasier, what would be the point of doing it ever again? Like, the greatest the greatest to ever play the game is out, so that's it. Yeah, so anything else to add about this finale?
I wanted to say that I appreciated that poor Frederick got a mention in both the pilot and the finale, although, of course, was not shown in either of them. I looked it up online. The actor who played Frederick was in a total of 8 episodes out of 236 episodes of the show. Frasier really does not get enough credit for being like the worst dad of the 90s.
That is God, that is terrible. Yeah. Well, I think actually I did read somewhere, this might have been on IMDb, and it was like there was a big thing of like they had to make sure that they mentioned Frederick in the pilot, so it didn't seem as though Frasier was like a deadbeat dad. Like, he had to be seen as though, okay, so Frederick's in Boston, I assume? Yeah. And he had to at least, because if you're listening at home and you haven't seen a map of America, Boston and Seattle are not close to each other, you know what I mean? No. So, yeah, they had to put in a line to make sure it was definitely apparent that he wasn't like a deadbeat father. But at the same time, you are like, yeah, so so what you're saying is, in the space of 11 years, he saw his son 8 times.
Basically. I think a couple of times they start out episodes where they're like, oh, I just came back from seeing Frederick or something like, or Frederick had just left for his visit. But still, it's like that might bump it up to maybe 12 times.
Wow, so it's
pretty. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think that at some point, like, Frederick moves to the West Coast. Am I wrong? Right. Doesn't he move to, like, I thought that he moved somewhere, like, closer.
Maybe.
At some point. That might be wrong, though. I might be misremembering it. But even still, I mean, so for people who don't know the geography of the United States, Seattle is probably like a 3 or 4 hour plane ride from Boston. So it's definitely not that close. Like, it's not like, oh, I'm just going to jump over for the afternoon. But Frasier is a professional psychiatrist and a radio personality who lives in like a penthouse in Seattle with the great views of the Space Needle and everything. He more than could have facilitated seeing him more than 8 times in 11 years.
That's pretty bad. I live in Australia, and I see my family in England more than that. Not much more, but more.
And that's a bit further than Seattle to Boston.
Yeah, that's it. That is incredible. It would have been. I'm surprised there wasn't like a season where Lilith just like took Frederick to live with Frasier, and you had like a season of Frasier being like a hands-on dad. Like, I feel like there's a lot of comedy to get from that, but I guess they were like, nah, we'll just bring him in once every...
The funny thing is, I'm looking at the IMDb page of, like, the cast list, and Bebe Neuwirth, who played Lilith, was in 12 episodes. So she's got her son beat by 4.
Oh my god, that is incredible. Oh, how ridiculous. I mean, I guess that is one of those things of just, like, I bet they were just sat there being like, why did we give this guy a kid when he was on Cheers? What are we going to do with this now? We don't want a kid in this show. We don't want baby Frasier. Okay, we'll work it out. Like you say, I guess you could just start every season with, oh well, that summer with Frederick was cool. Just like, just start every season like that, or just every season just starts from closing the door like, bye, Frederick.
It's so funny because in the pilot, he goes on and on several times about how it's killing him, it's torture to be so far away from his son. It's like, really? I don't think so.
No,
actions speak louder than
you got
words.
over it. Yeah, you got over it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I'm just having a bit of a look at my notes here, but I think we've pretty much gone through... The Kenny thing was pretty funny, where he's got the DJ thing. I thought that was pretty ridiculous, like, as the sort of anti-Frasier, like, taking over the radio show and just being like an 80s shock jock type thing of, like, yeah, no, that was very good. Like, that character, don't really recall a lot of him, but yeah, that's pretty good. But it's just like...
He was just like the lovable idiot kind of like comedic character, He was very sweet and very dumb.
Yeah, that's good.
I feel like he totally just was very flippant about the way that, like, he's like, should I completely change my life? And he's like, yeah, fine, you should. Just leave me alone. I want to be with my girlfriend. Like, and then he does it. And you're like, doesn't he have like a bunch of kids? I think he does. It's like, I don't know if that was a good moment for Frasier.
That was quite dark. Okay, cool. Okay, anything else to add about Frasier or these final episodes?
No, I guess that's pretty much it. I mean, the one thing that we didn't cover that I thought we might was the Niles and Daphne relationship. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Sorry, that completely passed me by, because I guess like I say, because it didn't sort of, his obsession with her didn't really come up in the first episode, and then obviously by the last episode they're married with a kid. Right. It's actually quite, it's funny, I sort of forgot about it. which obviously it was a huge part of the show for season after season after season. Like
especially in those middle seasons, like because at the first, like definitely the first season, and pretty much I'm pretty sure even the whole second season, it's mostly just a joke. Like Niles thinks Daphne is amazing and would love to have an affair with her, but can't because he's a good person, so he just is like very lecherous towards her all the time, which is a super weird dynamic. Especially you think like this is like network television, and it's just like this married guy like drooling all over this woman who's just trying to do her job. Like it's really strange that that's how this great love affair started.
Yeah, very much so. But I think
it's because like those actors are so likable and they have great chemistry together. That you really just, you forgive it because you just want to see them together, even though the way that things start out is pretty gross. Like, if you were just going to describe the plot of Frasier from Niles' perspective, it would not be great.
No. Well, I think the thing is that sort of puts it above some other shows, because I've noticed that this is like a trend that they've sort of gotten rid of now, where you'd have like a character who is like a male character who's madly in love with a female character and is very obvious about it, and even though the female character has sort of said no, it's not going to happen, they sort of think, oh well, if I keep trying and I'll do these romantic gestures and so on, and eventually they win them over. Whereas like I don't know, do you watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine?
I haven't seen the last few seasons. I watched the first like 2.5 and then I kind of gave up on it. It's
good, but there was that dynamic at the start, like two characters where like the nerdy dude's in love with like the cool cop, and she wants nothing to do with him, and then they sort of kept it up, and then I think by mid-season they just completely dropped it, because people were like, no, this is creepy and weird, and there's nothing romantic about this, we don't like it. And I think Frasier sort of gets around that, because obviously Daphne is oblivious, she doesn't know about Niles, so there's not a sense of like, he's chasing after her, she wants nothing to do with him, but he's just going to persist. He's just got like because he's such a sweet character as well, he's just got this like puppy dog love for her and just worships her. And then I think the season where they sort of got together was a bit of a lull, and then the show picks up afterwards and sort of gets it back together.
Well, I think once they get together it works, but they kind of played it back and forth for a little while, where there was like the whole sequence where they so they both had decided that they liked each other and they wanted to be together. But then Daphne was married for some reason by accident. And so then it's like, oh no, or she was engaged, I think. And it was like, well, I want to be with you, but I'm engaged to this person. And then finally that gets resolved. But in the resolution, Niles gets married to someone else. And then it's like, oh no, but now Niles is married. And it was like, all right, come on. Like, if you're going to do this, let's just do it. You're going to string us along a little too much. And I think the show did like kind of dip in quality a little bit through those arcs, because it was just too much of teasing the audience. But I think once they finally were able to go out and actually be an item, then it really picks back up.
That's good. I think that was sort of like a sweet part of the show, and there was some really good episodes where, you know, she was about to find out, or, you know, anything like that. And I think that is something that you don't really see that much on TV anymore. Like those sort of like will they, won't they's and everything. Like I think a few shows just did it so well that it's like. Because, I mean, even, like, I'm not the biggest Friends fan, but I think, like, the first season of Friends with, like, Ross and Rachel and all that was really good. And Sam and Diane on Cheers, obviously, like, is one of the most famous.
For a while, it was a staple of the sitcom. You know, like, if it's not a family sitcom, it's going to become a rom-com at some point, because there's that will they, won't they that's, like, built into it. I know the most recent one that I could think of is New Girl. Did you ever see that show?
I didn't, and other people have said to me, yeah,
they had a will they, won't they, and they like botched it majorly, because it was one of those things where they decided that they weren't going to tease it out too long, and they were just going to just like let the characters get together, because that's what you would do in that situation. So by like season 2, they get together, but then they realized that they weren't funny together. So then they had to break them up, and then it was like, well, maybe we might get them back together, and it was really bad. And I actually stopped watching the show around that time because it's just like it doesn't, So that's the risk. That's why a lot of the times they tease it out so long, because they're afraid. Well, once they get together, then there's not going to be anything funny. There's not going to be that dynamic that pulls. But I think that the best shows show that that's not true. That if they're really good characters and they should be together as a couple because they have a good dynamic, it doesn't matter if they're getting together or not.
No, that's it. Because I think you can sort of like if you're good and you can do it. So you can have like a couple of years of like Niles pining after Daphne, and then there's so much comedy inherent in Niles as a person, as a character, and Daphne as a character, and then putting these two people together in a relationship like that, those different worlds colliding. And I think once the show worked that out, and that they didn't need to worry about will days and won't days and shit like that, then the show picked up and it worked, because you had then like this strong, interesting relationship storyline of these characters who, by rights, should never have really entered each other's worlds, and then they do, and it's great. So right. I think there is that, like you say, I think that the year that they sort of like the will they won't they ended and then continued was where I sort of fell off the show for a bit before I came back. But once they'd sort of got that together, I was all over it. So Alex, you are one of the hosts of the Cinema Joes podcast. So can you tell me a little bit about that? Or
sure.
Tell my listeners something about that.
I'd love to. So that's a podcast where me and my two co-hosts get together every week. Sometimes we have guests on. We talk about a recent release that's come out, and we also try to use that recent release as kind of like a springboard to talk about the bigger trends going on in cinema. So recent episodes that we've had, we reviewed Dunkirk, and then we talked about The Summer. And our most recent episode is about the movie Mother by Darren Aronofsky, and then we use that as an excuse to talk about Jennifer Lawrence's career, and how we feel it's gone so far, and kind of what we hope to see going forward.
Fantastic! Oh, that's good, because like I think there are quite a few movie podcasts that are just like a couple of bros. They just talk about a movie, and then the show ends. Right. But it's good. It's good to have that sort of expansive thing, and like from listening to episodes, like the three of you do have that sort of you got a good cinema knowledge and a good cinema literacy, and it's good. It's an entertaining, fun podcast, and I would advise everyone to listen to it, especially when I guest on it, which is going to happen. Definitely. So yeah,
we're excited to have you on.
Yeah, can't wait. Alex, where can people find you on the internet if you wanted to be found?
Well, the podcast, Cinema Joes, is actually on Twitter at Cinema Joes. We're lucky enough to get that handle. And then you can also follow me on Twitter at Media Thinkings.
Oh, okay. Awesome. And that's it, really. Alex, thank you for coming on the show.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Of course. And if you're listening and you want a guest on the show, please find me on Twitter at firsttolastpod, or email me directly at fromfirsttolastpodcast@gmail.com. There's still lots and lots of shows to do. But yeah, I put out the call. I went on Twitter. I said, who is going to be brave enough to take on the greatest of all time, Frasier Crane? And Alex, you stepped up, and I think we really did him proud. Thank you for giving me an excuse to watch Frasier again. And to spend, an hour and 20 minutes on a Sunday morning just talking about how much I love Frasier. So again, Alex, thank you very much for coming on the show.
It was my pleasure.
And my name is Sean Fallon. This has been From First to Last. Goodbye.